All right, let's do this thing.
Let's do it.
Welcome to the Evolving Man podcast, Dr. Anthony Balduzzi. I'm really excited to have you on the show. You are a professional in the field of men's aging, fitness, perhaps even well knowledged in hormones and male hormones, and I'd love to talk to you about that today. Thanks for coming on the show.
Happy to be here, Ben.
Tell me, what is it that you do, and why do you do it?
So I help men, particularly those at the midpoint of life, 40 plus, lose weight, build muscle, get their energy back so they can be strong and healthy for their families. And the reason I'm so passionate about helping men, and the reason that my team and we run a company called the Fit Father Project, is because growing up, I basically saw my dad lose all of that. My dad essentially bought into the model that he needed to work really hard to earn money to take care of me, my mom, my little brother. And I watched him for years basically slave away, work himself to the bone, neglect his health, and trade all of his health that he did have in his younger years for the money to provide for our family. And he eventually got so sick that he died at 42 years young. I was 9 at the time. My little brother was 6, and it completely rocked our world. And in the months after dad died, I had a lot of time to do a lot of reflection. And the silver lining in that was I learned some lessons very early on in life. And that is that health is the foundation of everything we love. I watched my dad lose everything he loved, his ability to spend time with me, my mom, my little brother, the ability to pursue his hobbies and passions, to even work, which he did love doing that as well. I saw him lose all of that when his health slipped. So that really rewired my psychology from a very young age to understand that health is essential. It's this foundation. And I set out on a quest to figure out how I could get and stay healthy now to take care of my mom, my little brother, and in time, help other guys like my dad who are struggled and pulled in so many different directions, who want to be good men and providers, and feel like the health is on the back burner, how we can help them, reconcile that and create simple and sustainable health routines. That brought me to a lot of amazing experiences, personal training, bodybuilding, medical school, and eventually a culmination that is the Fit Father Project, where we've helped, I think through our programs, over 30,000 guys in over 100 countries lose weight and get healthy. And so we have unique philosophies around aging, weight loss, nutrition, exercise. And really our philosophy boils down to is we like to help guys make this stuff simple and sustainable, because there's a lot of information out there. I think a lot of guys know what they should be doing, but it's like, how do we implement this into sustainable routines that actually work and produce results? And I think that's something my team and I have gotten pretty good at doing for guys.
Yeah, you guys have a huge thing going on there, and it's really impressive how many men you've been able to help so far. And so you worked with bodybuilders, or did you do bodybuilding yourself?
I was a competitive bodybuilder myself from the ages of, I did my first bodybuilding show when I was 19, and I competed until I was around 24. So a good chunk of years, and it was an amazing experience. And I was into fitness and bodybuilding before I got into the field of medicine.
Yeah.
And what was beautiful about that is fitness teaches you a lot of stuff that medical school could never teach you,
Right.
particularly about how to really dial in a diet and exercise routines to create very drastic changes to the body. I learned a lot about hormones through bodybuilding. I learned a lot about how dietary patterns really help affect those changes in the body. A lot of personal experience. And after I did finish competing, I coached a lot of different bodybuilders as well in that space.
And how old are you now?
I'm 30.
Aha. You're 30 years young. Yeah. So I when I looked into this, I was like, oh, this is a guy who's like older and who has structured this thing for older guys. But this is like a mission that you got on from a very young age as a result of losing your dad.
Exactly.
And wanting to help guys at that age range. Yeah.
And it was funny because, I really started coaching guys in that age range when I was 21, when I got my first personal training job. And at the time, I'd been doing this stuff. I really got passionate about studying health and fitness when I was 11. This was like a year and a half after dad died is when I started reading the books. And a lot of it was more bodybuilding fitness stuff. But by the time I was 21, I've been doing this stuff for a decade and doing a lot of competitive bodybuilding. And then a decade later at 30, on my way to 31, I've been doing this stuff for 20 years. So age is a funny thing. I definitely feel it a little more in my body now. But also I'm very appreciative of the wisdom I've gathered over the last 2 decades studying this stuff.
How old do you want to live to?
I'll tell you this. I used to Very much. If you asked me 5 years ago, I would have said a very, very long time. You know,
Yeah.
I do believe that people living in today who take care of their bodies, and also take advantage of a lot of the things we're discovering with longevity in modern medicine can live to 150 plus. I am in the camp who believes that that is
Yeah.
possible for us. For me, though, a fixation on age and the pursuit of this kind of immortality thing has become such a secondary thing to living just a quality and a beautiful life with as much time as I'm afforded. I've become a more spiritual man over the last several years, and so I'm no longer fixated on a number. What I will say is what I do want is in my end years. Let's say I am 90. I'd like to be like Jack LaLanne. For those who not know, he's a
Right.
fitness icon. You know, and he was doing push-ups and pulling boats into his 90s, and that's something that really does inspire me. It's function
Yeah.
in old age, and I know it's 100% possible. Especially, we have guys on our Fit Father program in their 80s who now have six packs.
Hmm.
So, and these are guys who had beer bellies only like a year ago. So
Right.
it's very possible, which is the inspiring message.
That's amazing. Yeah, I share your sentiments. I have a grandfather who recently passed. Frank. He died almost at 101. He was 100 years old and he was almost at 101. And he did live quite well. Like he was still working when he was 85 because he wanted to, because there was some workaholism going on there. Like it was
Mhm.
like, if I'm not building things, then what am I going to do with my life? And so he worked until they told him, like, listen, you need to retire. Like you just got two new knees, enjoy those things. He got new knees at age 86 and he retired right around then. But he did live a good life. And so I look at him and I'm like, oh, I'm blessed with perhaps these genes where this guy lived to 100, and he had the length and the quality that we're talking about. And I'm 36. I just turned 36. And so, I've been told 35, that's when aging really starts to become a thing for a guy, right? And there starts to be this slow decline in testosterone.
Mhm.
And of course, we see tons of men over the age of 40 who are soft, pot
Mhm.
bellies, just carrying a bunch of extra weight. And so I'm now on a mission to learn as much as I can about men's aging and how I can keep my quality of life high, slow down aging as much as possible without being obsessed with it, like you're talking
Mhm.
about, and how hormones come into the picture, and what are kind of like my level 1, 2, and 3 interventions um, for dealing with my hormones, so that I can manage them as I get older.
Mhm.
So perhaps we could just dive into what does the aging process look like for men, um, hormonally, and just like what are we seeing typically in our culture,
Mhm.
um, in terms of like what the standard is, and what an ideal aging process would look like.
Yeah, I love this topic. I'm super excited. And I'd like to launch into this first with a little bit of philosophy on aging. We have the misconception around aging that we are alive currently and that we're moving towards this end destination that is death,
Right.
that we're on this linear continuum and that we're progressing forward. But that's not exactly true. Our bodies are constantly in a flux of life and death. These cycles are
Mhm.
happening all the time. Our red blood cells, they live for 120 days. That's predetermined. They replace themselves every 120 days. Every 10 years, every cell in our body has replaced itself. Right now, you and I are constantly both dying and being reborn on a cellular level. This stuff is constantly happening.
Yeah.
There's a rejuvenation, a death, and a life cycle. So, this is a part of nature. It's a part of our bodies. It is how things work. When we're looking at extending lifespan, while also maintaining an incredibly high quality of life, we want to limit the amount of damage that we accrue,
Yeah.
damage that would accelerate this process, this churning cycle. Because as we damage things, there a lot more regeneration needs to happen. And if we do think of our cells have a pre-programmed amount of life in them, you may have heard people talk about telomeres
Yeah.
and the
Telomeres.
divisions that happen, and how as we do more cell division over time, that lifeline wick gets smaller over time, and then we extinguish at the end of things. We want to minimize damage, and that damage comes in the effects of all the things we ingest through food, the quality of the air we breathe, the amount of exercise we do that helps our body create this endogenous resilient antioxidant system that protects our DNA. It happens to do with our stress levels. When we're more stressed, there's a lot more turnover and a lot more cell death that does happen in that process. So we need to absolutely focus on the things we ingest and the quality of those inputs. And we'll talk about those, I'm sure, in a lot more depth. The next thing that I think is really important before we get into hormones is we do know that if we want to live a long time, we need to look at the things that kill most people.
Yeah.
And so for most people, they're dying of a lot of these chronic diseases of metabolism for the most part. We have diabetes, heart disease, cancer are like probably our three main killers. And so diabetes is a dysregulation of blood sugars. And we know when it comes to living a long, healthy life, we need stable blood sugar control. So that's why diet is absolutely probably one of the most implicated things with longevity. When we have a lot of sugar floating in our blood at all times, sugar is sticky. It's kind of like caramel, right? We think of that stickiness. Well, it binds to our cells, and that gunks them up, causes inflammation. When it gets into our brains, it can cause plaques, et cetera, that are precursors to Alzheimer's disease. When it gets into our arteries, it causes inflammation, which our body lays down cholesterol plaques, and we have artery disease, coronary artery disease from that. So sugar maintenance and balance is essential. Now, our bodies also have an inborn machinery for longevity. Like I said in the beginning, we have this kind of yin and the yang of cells are dying, cells are being born, and there's actually metabolic triggers that help our cells rejuvenate, and that is fasting and feeding periods as well. Humans, if we look at the longevity of our species and a lot of the pressures we had, environmental pressures, particularly like thousands of years ago before the advent of modern agriculture, we went through periods of fasting and feeding. This is the normal aspect of what the stressors that the body had to encounter. And when we fast, when we're in a non-fed state, our body goes through some tremendous rejuvenating practices. Growth hormone rises. Our bodies actually cause some of these damaged cells to get recycled, so they're not constantly building up. It's like metabolic garbage, I guess you could say. Our body takes out the garbage when we're in a fasted state. So we're also finding from a lot of the research that one of the most reliable ways to extend lifespan is through intermittent fasting, calorie restriction. We do know that the body is meant to be in periods of time where we're not ingesting food. And unfortunately, we have a culture, particularly I know you guys in Canada, us here in the United States, where we're constantly fed, four square meals a day, lots of sugar in those meals, the glycation issues we talked about, and lots of low quality inputs, sugar, toxic, crap we're getting in the plastics that are affecting hormones. We'll talk about all this stuff. So this is why when we look at longevity, I think the diet is probably one of the first places to start. We want calorie restriction, we want high quality inputs. So I'll pause there, and then we can I'll be interested in to get into unpack some of those things. That's like a very broad stroke of how some of these factors play into longevity.
Yeah. So I'm 4 meals a day for sure. I'm not in that now, but that's what I was raised on, and that's what I was told was normal. I'm curious, even in bodybuilding and weight gain, and when I was 18, I read Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding, and I got into my own version of bodybuilding unprofessionally. At one point, I was 150 pounds, and I was bench pressing 305 as my max.
Nice.
And then after I did that, I was like, I'm not going to go any further here. My arms are going to break off or something. So, but I'm curious, when you were bodybuilding, were you fasting? Did you learn about fasting back then? And were you practicing that 10 years ago?
So in the beginning of my bodybuilding, when I started, I read Arnold's Encyclopedia. Probably the first 10 years, I wasn't doing any fasting. The idea was to be as anabolic as possible, as long as possible. And there are a lot of hormones that are very anabolic. One of the most anabolic hormones on the planet is insulin.
Right.
Just the hormone that's released from the pancreas when we have sugar encountered. Insulin causes things to grow. And when insulin also stimulates the liver to produce insulin-like growth factor 1, IGF-1, which causes things to grow. We know when looking at longevity and particularly cancer typically grows in the presence of high sugar, and most IGF-1, this molecule that's downstream of insulin and growth hormone, causes cancers to grow and proliferate. So I think unchecked, rampant, and anabolic signaling, which is great for bodybuilding, is not great for longevity. You don't see a lot of bodybuilders living to 100. As I got further down my bodybuilding career, I started to do more intermittent fasting, realizing that meal timing, how frequently you eat, is definitely secondary to your total energy intake. Like how much protein, carbs, and fat are you getting per day? If you're meeting these totals for what you need for your particular goals, you can get it on an intermittent fasting framework that totally works fine.
Yeah.
But that being said, bodybuilding is the pursuit of trying to create the biggest, leanest body possible. And that's not necessarily conducive to living the longest life possible.
Yeah.
This is another reason why, you just look at the difference between maybe an omnivorous diet, a bodybuilder's diet, which has certainly a lot of animal proteins in it, and maybe like a totally plant-based diet. We know that testosterone levels end up being about the same. If anything, there's vegetarians and vegans have a slightly higher testosterone level, but whereas the difference is found in the IGF-1 content of the diet. When you're having animal products, particularly dairy, you have higher levels of IGF-1. And when it comes to longevity, and the real experts on this stuff, they're going to tell you that having lower levels of IGF-1 is probably to your benefit. So
Right.
I think a diet, if you're looking to find the middle ground between having awesome performance and looking great while still getting some of these benefits of the fasting and stuff like that, then having a cyclic calorie restricted diet like intermittent fasting is great.
Mm-hmm.
Either you fast for a certain period of the day, you push back that first meal, or if you enjoy breakfast, then having one 24-hour dinner to dinner fast a week is a good thing. It's like your recycling day where you allow your body to break down the things that are going to build up and cause problems in the long term.
Yeah. Or you do what I'm doing and you have breakfast at 1 p.m.,
Perfect.
which is my standard.
That's good. I mean, it's wonderful. And it helps you control your calories pretty naturally, because if you're eating in a, 6-8 hour window, it's a lot easier to be full during that time.
Yeah. Okay. So high quality food, calorie restriction, not calorie restriction, time restricted feeding.
Yes.
In some cases, calorie restriction. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I'm aware of the research that in many different animals, at the very least, if you restrict calories to 30%, you can extend the life by a certain percentage.
Substantially. Yes.
Substantially. So that's something to remember, is that like we don't have to stuff ourselves all the time, and that actually taking these periods of restriction in terms of time or calories or both is actually very useful for longevity. So you're doing something now that's going to pay dividends decades down the road, and developing those habits now is very useful. So I've seen the benefits in my own life with this. I went for a run the other day. I had gone on vacation for a week and just eaten whatever, whenever. And I got home and I fasted big time, and went for a run at like 2 p.m. I still hadn't eaten. And I felt just amazing on my way home. I was like, oh my God, I feel like Superman, because my body was settling back into that intermittent fasting state. And it's getting used to it now. Like originally, it was a very difficult thing to do, but the body's adapting, and I'm really feeling it now. And I'm like, oh, I can do this for the rest of my life. Like I feel like this is making me younger when I do it.
Yes, you're spot on. A couple things I want to tease out to really hammer those home. Your summary was great. There is a unique benefit to simply having cyclic calorie restriction, meaning having periods of no calories, like fasting. It gives you an independent benefit from overall energy intake. So basically, you can match people for calories. We have two groups of guys. Group A eats 2,000 calories, Group B eats 2,000. But if we put the Group B on a cyclic intermittent fasting diet where they're having a period of not eating, a fasted period, they get unique benefits. So this is key. It's not just calorie restriction overall, total energy intake. It's this cyclic component that tends to drive a lot of these amazing metabolic processes. Yeah.
So you can eat the same things, but change your pattern and get better results.
Yes, 100%. And then I think we'll talk about hormones too, because this is definitely something we want to look at when living a long and healthy life. And you cited it pretty well in the beginning of this talk, that testosterone levels steadily decline in the mid 30s by about 1% per year, which doesn't seem like a whole lot on the front end of things, but when you're 70, that number does stack up pretty substantially. And so right now, it's interesting because there's like a big marketing hype push right now targeting guys, particularly those 40 plus, saying that testosterone is the key to your health and longevity, and that you're testosterone deficient. That's why you're having all these problems. And it's unfortunately not quite that simple. Testosterone is important, but I think the overall thing to probably focus on is getting on a simple and sustainable meal plan, whether it's intermittent fasting or something else. Nutrition, number one, daily exercise, number two, and the testosterone oftentimes starts to take care of itself. Because one of the biggest ways you can boost your testosterone, I'll give you a couple that are very relevant. The first way is to lose body fat. Seriously, the most important thing, because our body fat does contain this enzyme called aromatase, which converts testosterone to estrogen. It's so well documented that men who carry a lot of body fat they turn a lot of testosterone into estrogen.
Okay.
So like taking a testosterone boosting supplement or something like that is not the answer if you're carrying body fat. It's actually to figure out how to lose the weight and keep it off long term. The second thing that's essential is to understand that cortisol and testosterone have like a seesaw relationship. So cortisol is one of our body's
Uh-huh.
main stress hormones. It's absolutely vital. It gets a bad rap for a lot of reasons. It's only bad when it's chronically elevated because we have these very busy lives. We're not sleeping well enough. We have a lot of different kinds of stressors that are raising cortisol all the time. We're in this fight and flight sympathetic drive state. And when that is the case, testosterone levels, they plummet. As cortisol is high, testosterone's low, and it's a very well documented effect.
Mhm.
So finding ways to, when we're looking at longevity, finding ways essentially to have great buffers, psychological buffers, physical buffers for stress, like understanding how to be as peaceful as possible for as long as possible, how to keep your body in a more relaxed state. And that it comes down to all the things a lot of us know, good nose breathing, good diet, regular exercise, healthy family connections in relationships, being able to understand the psychology of some of our compulsive thinking.
Mhm.
All of these are essential to longevity. I love some work by a guy named Daniel Buettner, Blue Zones. He did a thing on National Geographic, basically looked at the pockets of longevity around the world, people who
Yeah.
live to 100, centenarians, you're familiar.
Yeah.
And the stuff they found that was highly correlated with longevity are strong social connections, regular stress releases, a high quality diet, time outside. It's like, these are like the fundamentals. And these are the things we need to become masters at if we want to live a very long time. But I cannot stress enough how important controlling stress is for testosterone. That means you need to sleep well every single day and lose some body fat. If you can do those two things, your testosterone levels will naturally increase. The answer is not necessarily taking a supplement, although I would like to talk about some of the vitamins, minerals, nutraceuticals, and stuff like that that can help testosterone levels as well in a little
Yeah.
bit.
Definitely. Yeah, I love how you framed all of that, and I'm just thinking about like the typical man's man in North America who stuffs his feelings, doesn't pay attention to his levels of stress, thinks that it's the less you sleep and the more coffee you drink, the more of a badass you are. The
Mm-hmm.
more stress that you can offload and just ignore and carry on your back, uh, the more manly and successful you are in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps that came from our father's generation or their father's
Sure.
generation. It's just sort of been passed down, but it is very prominent. And so here lies the problem, right? You're talking about having this balanced life, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work. We end up with overweight men with sagging testosterone, and almost like I'm envisioning almost a downward spiral where like build more fat, and that brings your testosterone down, or turns it into estrogen, and then you build more fat, and down you go over
Mm-hmm.
the years, right?
Totally.
So, okay, yes, a balanced life, lots of social connections. Study centenarians if you want to understand what really gets you to 100 years. But yeah, testosterone particularly. That's the main reason why, and not just testosterone, all male hormones. I did a full male hormone panel through on online testing kit that I could. It's called try. It's called Let's Get Checked,
Yeah.
and you
I'm familiar.
can right. You can just they mail you a test, you drip blood into a vial, and then you mail it back.
Mm-hmm.
And I got my results on the screen, and I saw my testosterone, I saw my growth hormone, I think, and then I saw multiple like a ratio.
You probably saw free testosterone, sex hormone binding globulin, and total testosterone.
Yeah.
Those three. Yeah.
Yes. And now I want to be able to like have a metric every year for
Mm-hmm.
the rest of my life. So the first thing that I learned when I looked into testosterone replacement therapy and what the story is, I actually watched one of your videos, is that once you get into serious testosterone replacement, you're like, oh, my levels are a little low. I need to like bump them up here. Once you get into that, it's very hard to get off of that.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I live a life where I don't have to do TRT,
Mm-hmm.
um, testosterone replacement therapy, until quite later or perhaps never?
Mm-hmm.
What does that healthy path look like?
Yeah, I mean, that healthy path looks like a lot of the things we've already discussed. I'll add a few more.
Mhm.
Essentially, I do think it's a good idea for most men who are not having some serious serious side effects that they absolutely can't get out of, to prolong the need to take TRT for as long as possible,
Yeah.
or not even take it at all. And the reason being, again, when you're taking any source of external testosterone, a cream, a shot, a pill, it's going to shut off your body's own natural production. Your body's getting from the outside. Your testicles shrivel up. They're like, we don't need to do any work. This is
Yeah.
being taken care of for us. And the problem there is it's kind of a decision you need to make and manage that long term, because when you come off, is it possible to re-kickstart your body? Yes, there are medications that can help, but it's not a guarantee. And there are some serious side effects. That's why when you make the choice to do TRT, you're kind of committing to the long haul. And for a lot of guys, it has been life-changing. But in my personal opinion, for as long as you can prolong that, it's a good idea to do that. So here's the deal. To really break it down very simply, I would say the key is, first off, to maintain healthy testosterone levels into, let's just say, your 80s without doing TRT, is to do high intensity exercise with weights 3 times a week minimum.
Uh-huh.
Strength training, we can maybe do twice a week full body, but like I think 3 times would be better. High intensity exercise raises testosterone levels. It also helps increase your muscle mass, which as you age, as muscle mass decreases, your metabolism decreases. This is just how it goes. And if your metabolism decreases and you're eating the same number of calories, you start to pack on body fat. And body fat converts testosterone to estrogen. So there's this whole cycle that can happen. So strength training is key, helps maintain that muscle mass, boost testosterone. Vitamin D3, especially for you guys in the Northern Hemisphere, up in Vancouver, Canada, right? I mean, is absolutely essential. Let's look at from an evolutionary biology perspective. Our ancestors were in constant connection with the sun and the cycles of the sun. The sun rises, it actually changes when we get light in our eyes. It changes a whole bunch of neurochemicals. We actually release serotonin in the morning that makes us feel good when the sun's there, and later in the day it gets converted to melatonin that helps us sleep. What also turns out that sun directly increases vitamin D3 levels through the skin, one of the sun's main benefits for our bodies. And vitamin D3 is an essential precursor with cholesterol for producing testosterone. Sperm cells have vitamin D3 receptors. There's vitamin D3 receptors in the testes. And get this, they also found that sunbathing the testicles, getting sunlight directly on the testicles, increases testosterone production. And this shouldn't come as a shock. It sounds kind of funny, but it's like our ancestors were in direct contact. Sun was hitting our testes for literally thousands of years, and now we get none of that. That's not to say that is the answer, but it is to say it is well documented. If you get sunlight on your balls, or you get a red light therapy light on your balls, you will have increased testosterone levels. So if anything, maintaining healthy levels of T is about how do we live as close to nature as possible, and these natural rhythms that our bodies are entrained to for thousands and thousands of years that are often challenging in a modern environment. So eating mostly whole, non-processed foods, and I'm not going to get into whether you should eat plant-based or you should eat animal products. You should eat real food that doesn't need a label: fruits, vegetables, meats, fish, eggs. Like high quality non-processed food is absolutely essential. We know that a lot of the additives in these foods are harmful to testosterone, particularly when you have a lot of processed foods that has some of these microplastics and things called phthalates. We've all heard of like the BPA free water bottles. There's so many endocrine disruptors in plastics, and a lot of us are now, we're so busy, we're microwaving stuff in plastic, and that's getting into our food. And it's very well documented that they're called xenoestrogens. These things decrease testosterone levels in men. They delay puberty in boys. They can feminize fish. They're finding a whole salmon, like a bass population who had some runoff from some toxic water that had a lot of birth control in it. And now the bass are like the male bass now are carrying eggs in their testes. Like,
wow,
this stuff affects us, and it's in our food and our sources and our products. So it's like clean air, clean water, regular exercise, good sunshine, modulating your stress. Like, these are the foundations. And there also are a couple different vitamins and minerals that are very important to keep in range. Vitamin D3 is naturally taken care of with the sun, but wintertime in Vancouver, you don't get that much sun. So supplementing with, let's just say 2,000 IUs of vitamin D3 could be a good idea. Zinc is another key mineral that's implicated in testosterone production. So 40 to 50 milligrams per day for guys. You can achieve that through your diet, but oftentimes when you see these testosterone boosting supplements, they have zinc in them, vitamin D3 in them, and they have magnesium in them as well.
Zinc and magnesium. Yeah.
You hear guys talk about these ZMA supplements, which is zinc and magnesium combinations. These do boost testosterone if you're deficient in these minerals. And I think I know a lot of guys are deficient in magnesium. Men who eat a good amount of meat and fish, not necessarily in zinc, but it's a good idea. It's lost through sweat to maybe get a little extra zinc. It's good for our immune system. So vitamin D3, zinc, magnesium are key. We also know that creatine monohydrate works for boosting testosterone levels. And it's a phenomenally good supplement, even if you're not a bodybuilder. It has this rap as being this old bodybuilder, athletic, performance enhancing supplement. It's actually one of the best supplements for your brain health. Creatine increases ATP. And we now know that when you take creatine long term, it actually helps the brain stay young because it increases ATP production in the brain. And as you age, this is super cool. When you're over 70, if you take creatine monohydrate, it actually helps you maintain your muscle mass independent of exercise.
Uh-huh.
Cool.
Yeah, wow.
So there's a lot of benefits taking some creatine around 5 grams every single day. Does not need to be cycled. And so there are some supplements that can help: the D3, zinc, mag, creatine. Another supplement that I do think is valuable is a herb called ashwagandha.
Uh-huh.
It also goes by withania. Somnifera is the actual herbal name. And it's super cool because what it does is actually decreases cortisol, which indirectly helps increase testosterone levels, and it helps you get into this more relaxed state. And it's very beneficial. So I think those are things to look into. I would also be really seriously looking at how much heated plastic you're having. There was a big thing, I think, with Live Strong, Lance Armstrong, and his foundation. We're looking at the breast cancer increase for women that was coming from having heated water bottles in cars and stuff like that, and microwaving and plastics. Like, this is a real thing. Like, our ancient ancestors didn't have to deal with these xenoestrogens, in our environment. So we got to think about that stuff.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah, ashwagandha is also very good for it. Decreases cortisol, so it decreases anxiety. It's very good
Yes.
for lowering stress levels. Are there any benefits to sauna and cold, like hot and cold therapy for aging?
Yes, 100%. Okay, so a couple things is what we want, and I like to start with the philosophy. We want a body that has resilience and has the ability to adapt to stressors. There's a big difference between a constant beating you down kind of stress that we talked about that's very good,
Hmm.
and an intermittent challenging stress. All life is essentially in the ambient environment is subjected to pressures. Like, the strongest plants grow in the highest environments with rugged wind, weather, etc., and they produce compounds to help them thrive. This is the benefit of using like hot and cold therapies: is they create an acute stress for the body, and the body gives an adaptive response. Like, what is exercise? What is lifting weights other than you go in there, I'm creating a stress on the body, I'm lifting 200 pounds on the bench press, and the body has to learn how to cope with that and get stronger, super compensate. So next time you go in, you're a little bit stronger, you can bench 210. It's
Yeah.
the same thing with our nervous system, with like a lot of the saunas and the cold therapies. Is it creates a nice stress on our bodies that leads to a lot of metabolic cascades. There are these things called heat shock and cold shock proteins that are released, and this is the adaptive response of our bodies to cold and hot, and they help stabilize our DNA. So let's talk about cancer again. One of the main causes of death for so many people, and it's estimated, I think, I don't know the exact journal. It was a British study that actually showed that they estimated that up to 50% of men will have cancer in their lifetimes today.
Yeah.
And this is because as we get older, the immune system decreases, and we have so many things these days that are damaging our DNA and creating a lot of bad stress in the DNA. Well, it turns out that these things called heat shock proteins, cold shock proteins, stabilize the DNA, prevent damage, and keep the DNA integral. When DNA gets damaged, this is where mutations happen. When mutations happen, this is where we have cancer cells. And cancer is essentially a cell that forgot how to die and grows rampantly. So
Right.
this is why hot and cold are really phenomenal. They also increase your immune system. And as we get older, the immune system gets old with us. It's like it's senescence. The immune system kind of gets worse. So this is why heat and cold can actually really help. I'm sure you're familiar with the Wim Hof's work.
Yes.
Iceman's work. So, what is his work other than exposure to cold and some very powerful breathing exercises?
Hmm.
Um, because if we look at also the process, and I want to talk about breathing too, because I think it's so foundational and not talked about enough. What are these? Our bodies are essentially, we have this heart that is a pump that shoots blood, oxygen-rich blood, all throughout our body. And that circulation is key because it delivers nutrients to our vital tissues. And it also removes waste and brings it back so it can be metabolized, excreted, etc. And the function of our lungs and our noses are to breathe in, to get that oxygen so it's available to the heart to pump the whole system. And this whole system is very it's very sensitive to our stress, et cetera. And this is why also we want to make sure that we're getting enough good oxygen throughout our breathing, throughout our lives. The more the quality of our circulation and the quality of our oxygenation ends up being the quality of our energy and is directly
Hmm.
correlated to our longevity. And it's just essential to breathe well. This is a little bit from some more yogi philosophy, but the yogis believe that if you can get your breath to be under 12 breaths per minute, 12 breath cycles per minute, you are in good health and you'll live a long, healthy life. If your breath is more than that, they love it if you can even get under 10. So this is a point where your circulation and your oxygenation system is so good that you don't need to breathe that much rapid, shallow breathing, et cetera, to get
Yeah.
all the oxygen your tissues need, and your body's in a very relaxed state that's not burning up oxygen because you're stressed. So it is very important work.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely want to talk about breath. I'm glad we covered hot and cold because I have a sauna in my backyard and a freezer that I fill with water, and I do the cycle between the sauna and the freezer a few times a week, and have
Good.
friends over, and it's a great opportunity to be social. And um, when we go really hot, like I did last night with my buddy Devin, and then really cold because the tank was at 4 degrees Celsius, we feel like we're high.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
you feel like you're on LSD coming
Well,
out
you
of
are.
there,
You
right?
are. Endorphins,
Yeah,
enkephalins, natural opioids, endocannabinoids. Your body's
yeah,
releasing all sorts of stuff, right?
yeah. But you just feel like $1 million
Hmm.
for 24 to 48 hours afterwards.
And the
Um,
depression benefits of the cold are very well noted. It helps stabilize your mood. And also, when you're doing the change, like it's not just hot and cold by itself. So we know that prolonged hot sauna after exercise is a great idea, very
right,
beneficial. I would avoid cold after exercise. I know it's a little
right.
counterintuitive, but cold does shut down some of these adaptive processes because it's prolonged cold is anti-inflammatory by its nature, and you actually want a little bit of that inflammation after exercise
Hmm.
to stimulate the adaptive response. So ice bath after exercise is not a good thing, but maybe on your off days, etc. But this contrast, the back and forth, is so cool because it causes that circulation. Like everything's dilating during the heat to
Hmm.
relieve heat, and then you get the contraction. And this
Yeah,
pumping mechanism is what helps the circulation.
yeah. And I love what you said about cells that forgot to die. It's like, okay, so I need to remember to kill dying cells. Like I
Hmm.
remember I need to flush out cells that could become cancerous by, hanging around for too long, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so when I'm in the sauna, I'm like, "Oh, I'm flushing." Like you
Yes.
feel yourself flushing. And if my nose is plugged in there at all, once I get in the cold tank, it's
Oh yeah.
gone, like, so there's a lot of flushing that goes on during that. There's a
Yeah.
lot of flushing that goes on during fasting, when
Hmm.
you're sort of like, you can sort of feel that, like, okay, my stomach is finished processing, but I'm still just sort of churning through the last bits of
Yes.
energy in my body, and it's on a different level. It's cleaning.
Okay,
um
we got to
yeah,
pause there because that's
yeah,
so. What you said is so cool, and I think it's a concept that not enough people hear about. Is this idea of cleaning the body tubes, and allowing us to like digest and completely rest. And I think that's why prolonged fasting is also so beneficial. Is our digestive tract is that we are tubes from our mouth to our butt. We are human tubes, and in a way that is
yeah,
this is considered outside of the body. I'll let that sink in because it's a little counterintuitive. It's kind of like,
yeah,
it's like driving through an underwater river tunnel in a car. Like, are you in the river as you're driving through the tunnel? You're
yeah,
not. And that's exactly what digestive tract is. We could
yeah,
take one long rope and we could floss you through your mouth and your butt.
yeah,
And we do not want stuff sitting in this digestive tube, festering, causing irritation. One of the most common cancers is colorectal cancer. And this is absolutely one of the cancers that is tied very heavily to diets, particularly processed meat intake.
mm,
The reason this happens is because different foods have different transit times through our bodies. A lot of fruits and vegetables move through very quickly. Something like a ribeye steak takes a lot longer to go through. It takes a lot longer to digest, and animal proteins don't move through the digestive tract as quickly as plant-based proteins do, and other plant fibers. And so when we have stuff sitting in the colon festering, we have gut bacteria in there that are breaking things down. We're releasing bile acids and bile salts.
mhm,
These things get converted into different compounds that actually irritate the lining of those gut cells in the colon. And we have constant damage to those cells. Guess what happens? Eventually, you may get a mutation, and
yeah,
then you have precancer. And then over time, as that continues to happen, and your body's not able to keep up with it, you can get colorectal cancer. This is why it's related. So I think it's a really great idea to think of our digestive tracts and to spend time in our routines. Maybe it's quarterly. We do a little cleanse, but we get this tube like totally cleaned out. There's an awesome guy. You can find him on YouTube. His name's John Rose. He's one of the biggest proponents of what he calls juice feasting.
Mm,
Or solid food vacations, both those things. He runs people on 100, 200 day solid food vacations. And this is like helping really sick people get off. But essentially, you're just only doing liquids until your
right.
digestive tract is out. And I did one earlier this year for 14 days. And I'll tell you this, it's amazing that if you're still pooping
Yeah.
after day 10 when you've ingested no solid food. And these
Wow.
are like those ancient poops that are just, in the little pockets of your intestine that have been there for
Yeah.
so long. It's good to do some deep cleaning on the body. And I think the regular fasting is good because it's cleaning, but the deep cleaning is a different level.
So you're still taking in calories in that
Correct. Different than
phase.
water fasting. So you're not like
Yep.
tanked, because if you're ingesting no calories at a certain point, your body is starving, and it can be beneficial to a point. But for guys like you and me who are at fairly normal weight range, we don't need to be doing prolonged water fasting. But if you can meet your calories through juices, etc., you can really clean out the digestive tract by not having any solid food intake, and it's very healing.
Hmm. That's a very interesting concept. I've not heard of that one. A guy that I recently went down the rabbit hole with is Dr. Zach Bush about the microbiome and the gut.
Nice.
Very interesting information Zach Bush is uncovering right now related to the tight junctions in the gut and how they
There
get
you go.
damaged and how that causes so much of
Yeah, this
what
whole
we see.
inflammatory cascade, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So, breath work. So, yeah, you mentioned earlier in the episode here about nose breathing. You said nose breathing, and I was like, nose breathing. Hey. So, and I love that you talked about the yogis and how the respiratory rate is ideally below, like, I think 12 breaths
Hmm.
per minute.
Hmm.
I'm looking at my data here for my sleep. I've got the Aura Ring,
Nice.
and so it tells me what my heart rate, body temperature has been, and then what my respiratory rate has been. I'm at 14 per minute. So, and that's like pretty standard. Like sometimes I get down to 13.9, but so I know I now have a
There's
goal here.
improvements to make there for
Yeah.
sure. If you can
Yeah.
get under 10, even better. There's a guy named Patrick McKeown, McKeown, who wrote a book called The Oxygen Advantage.
Mhm.
Really fascinating read. There's some breathing exercises you can do to help your respiratory rate slow down. But let's talk about nose breathing first. I'm definitely big on this whole ancestral, kind of like concept. And look, we have noses that are absolutely different than our mouths. We have these two holes. We get to choose where we want to bring the air through.
Mhm.
The nose has all the advantages. It is lined with hair that helps remove particulate matter from the environment that can cause us allergies and stuff. It has mucus. It has cells inside the nose that, when they sense oxygen coming through, they release nitric oxide, which
Mhm.
dilates all our blood vessels, and we get this kind of like vasodilation effect. And again, we know circulation is essential for a long, healthy life. We get that benefit through nose breathing. The air is actually almost like humidified and brought to the right temperature, so it's ideal to meet the lungs. So there is absolutely no reason to breathe through your mouth, with the exception of perhaps at the end of an all-out sprint where you need to release so much carbon dioxide that you cannot keep up with the exhalation of carbon dioxide through your nose.
Mhm.
Every person who is currently a mouth breather would benefit from becoming a nose breather. It can be a challenging thing, especially if you're eating foods that are causing inflammation, that are causing your mucus to be constantly filled in your nose. You can't
Yeah.
breathe through your nose very well. It's all linked, but nose breathing is just so essential for health. It's the best way to breathe, and we just kind of like forgot this. And indigenous cultures, the mothers would take a big benefit of actually making sure that their babies learn to breathe through their noses. When the baby starts breathing through his mouth at sleep, they'd either close the mouth or put a little piece of something over there to keep it so that they couldn't learn how to breathe through the mouth. And unfortunately, a lot of us become mouth breathers for a lot of reasons, and we all need to fix that, really, for longevity.
Yeah, I have a friend who put duct tape over his mouth for a period of time while he
Good.
was sleeping, right? Just to pattern that
Mm-hmm.
in. So I want to talk about uh, like Wim Hof style breath work and that kind of breath work, like, cyclical. I mean, Wim Hof does rounds,
Mm-hmm.
but there's also cyclical breath work that you can do for, hours on end. What benefit have you seen in the body for that type of breath work?
Well, the breath is the access point to our nervous system, particularly to the parts of the nervous system that are not normally under voluntary control. So we have this autonomic branch that of the nervous system that's just going automatically. It's controlling our breathing. We don't have to think about breathing. It just happens. Our heart rate happens, which is different than maybe a
Yep.
voluntary branch where like, I want to move my arm, I can do this. The breath is very linked to our ability to get deep into the autonomic nervous system, which can influence the immune system and it can influence our resiliency to stress. It seems like this type of breathing that Wim Hof does, which is like a very vigorous, energizing, lots of deep oxygenating breaths with retention afterwards. Just as phenomenal things for circulation, immune health. And I don't even know if we have all the science to understand fully why,
Mhm.
but we know it shifts the balance between sympathetic and the parasympathetic back and forth. And that switch seems to be very beneficial. It causes the circulation effect where the body constricts all the blood from the peripheral tissues, kind of like if you get into a cold tub and it drives it to the core. And with it, it's bringing a lot of these metabolic debris and a lot of these end products to the core. They can be filtered out through the kidneys, put into the poop with excretion. So there's this flushing effect that happens with that kind of breath work. And from my study, if we look at stuff like Wim Hof, we look at actually the guy I mentioned, the Oxygen Advantage, Patrick McCone. These guys all say do retaining breath work. On
Uh-huh.
exhalation, learn to hold your breath and reset your ability that the brain has that urge to breathe to make that as long as possible has benefits for the body. And past that, I can't present any more research other than I think it's a beneficial thing for the body. In a way, exercise has the benefit of teaching us to breathe through our nose and gets our breath rate a little more accelerated. That being said, I think everyone would benefit from doing some kind of breathing breath work every single day. I do it in the morning when I'm taking my morning walk. I get up, I have some good high quality hydration, and then I walk first thing before I meditate. And during the walk, I do intentionally, I'll take some walks. And this is from the Oxygen Advantage, Patrick McCone stuff. But you walk for like 30 seconds and then you, on an exhale, you hold your breath and walk for like 15 to 30 seconds.
Mhm.
Has a very similar effect to some of the principles in Wim Hof. And then doing stuff like Wim Hof breathing is also wonderful.
Yeah, so you're working with the presence of CO2 in your blood
Correct.
and
Exactly. Got it.
resisting that at some level.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I'm a free diver. I did my free diving training last year and recently
You,
went on my
you know
first
what's up.
trip. Yeah, and I do Wim Hof, 4 or 5 times a week lately. And
Mhm.
yeah, the more I do it, the more virile and strong I feel. And it's also just like the hot cold, it's a bit of a psychedelic. It's like definitely a
Totally.
state change. Okay, so back to aging and back to hormones. I'm 36. As I get older, the standard is that no matter what I do, um, exercise, hot, cold, breath work,
Mhm.
um, all of that, going for walks outside, breathing good air, um, my testosterone is going to decline
Mhm.
year upon year.
Yes.
Um, I don't know how to say this, but should I try to keep my testosterone at the same level because I think it's the elixir of life um, in perpetuity? Because there's a part of me that wants to do that. To be
Mhm.
honest, I'm like, I would love to keep my testosterone levels high, not like stupid high, not bodybuilder high, but like where they're at now forever.
Mhm.
And is that possible? Um, and
Yeah,
how would I do that?
it would only be possible with, at that point, with some external supplementation, with some TRT on top of that. You're going to get this natural decline, and in a way, it's kind of like the body's seasons of life. If we look at it more from a macroscopic perspective, the body is naturally declining in that later season. If you are wanting to maintain those levels and offset that decrease, I would do exactly what you're doing. Start checking now every single year to get a benchmark, because then you'll know. And I would say a couple things on checking your testosterone. I would make sure that you check your testosterone at the same time, every single time, so you get very standardized. Testosterone naturally peaks around 8 a.m.
Yep.
And it's at the lowest at night, so make sure you're taking it around the same times. And I would also make sure that when you're testing it every year to get like good, if we're going to base it off these numbers, good solid numbers, that you're doing it during a period of days where you don't feel anything's extreme. You're not overly fried and stressed from work, and it's just like a normal kind of like a baseline kind of thing.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, I would say it's only likely a good idea to start looking at testosterone replacement therapy if you're feeling symptoms of the decline. There's so many camps when you look at the medical treatment of this. There's some doctors who really like to treat lab work. They're like, I believe that the best testosterone levels for you, Ben, is at 700. And whenever you're under 700, we should do this, or
Yeah.
500 or 1,000. And unfortunately, I don't believe that's the right perspective. I believe you need to treat the person's like manifesting symptoms. If you're feeling great and your testosterone level is 500 and you're in your 60s, I'm good with it personally.
Yeah.
And I don't even know, we can't even say that you would necessarily have a benefit to getting that level to 650 in terms of how you feel, to 700 in terms of how you feel. I
Yeah.
will say this. Testosterone needs to be well maintained. I mean, if you're anywhere, I would say if you're kind of like tanked out around the 200-300s, and you are feeling some symptoms and you're 60, like man, TRT, and you have lost, and your body fat is at a good healthy range where you know you don't have a lot of fat left to lose, and you've kind of, and you know you're exercising pretty well and your sleep is decent. If you've checked those boxes, then it could be a time to do it. I guess we really don't know. We don't have enough like long-term data on, the people who've been taking TRT for 20 years, what it gonna be like in like 40 years from now.
Yeah.
Um, I think if you wanted to keep them at those ideal levels, then you're probably taking some kind of replacement therapy at that point. But I hope for you that you can do it, when you're 60 plus. I'm pretty confident you can get
Mhm.
through your 40s and your 50s without it.
Yeah. So the ideal would be go as long as I can, um, exercising, doing all the stuff, um, until I get my levels checked and I'm feeling crappy and my levels are low enough that it's worthy of taking note.
Worthy of making the decision to be like, this is the track we're hopping on now, and this train's going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because yeah, in my early research, and you talked about this in your videos, once you start taking TRT and it brings your levels up, if you want to get off of it, your levels are going to go below where they were previously,
Oh,
at least
and
2 or below.
totally.
Right.
No, they will 100% be below, because when
Right.
you take CRT prolonged, your testicles stop producing testosterone, and the
Yeah.
whole feedback loop between your hypothalamus, your pituitary, your testes, this HPTA axis, basically shuts down. Because testosterone gives it this negative feedback that says, "Hey, we don't need to produce anymore." So when you get off and you're older, is a lot harder to kickstart that stuff. Like bodybuilders who take steroid cycles, they can restart that, but they're using drugs that are often used for breast cancer and other kinds of things like that, and it doesn't work as well when you're in your 60s and 70s to try to re-kickstart. So you got to stick with it. And there are factors, like if you are doing the shots, for example, being on the shots every week, every other week, whatever kind of form of testosterone you're on, it could be a logistical challenge. Like, what happens if you and your family want to go to Italy or Croatia? Like,
Right.
I don't know, like, do you take your shots with you? Are you good for that amount of time? What's the
Yep.
legality of you bringing those things through? They have other ways. They have creams, they have pills, but yeah, it's a big decision. And it has absolutely changed the lives of many men who were totally tanked. But yeah, I would prolong it for sure.
So, yeah, what would you say to someone who's like, "Well, I think that I'm, lacking in energy and I'm not sleeping well, because of my low testosterone."
Get your
Uh,
levels checked. Get them
right.
checked, because there's so many factors that influence energy and mood. And I think we've been really driven down this like marketing rabbit hole that everything's linked to testosterone. Testosterone's a big player for sure, but having high stress, poor sleep, how many teenage boys are there that have sky high testosterones, and they're also like super depressed, overweight, and low moods,
Yep.
and low energy, like, in the presence of basically natural steroids that happen when you're
Yeah.
17, 18, 19, right? So
Yep.
there are a lot of variables on the table.
Yeah, so if you're older, let's say you're 50 and you aren't sleeping well and your stress is high and you do have some body fat and you get your testosterone levels checked and they are low. Your advice is, well, do what you got to do to upgrade your sleep hygiene, your exercise, lower your stress before you start dealing with the testosterone, because that
Mhm.
should be those are the original factors that you should
Yes.
deal with.
Original factors is a great word. And even if you're like the kind of guy that's like, dude, like, I'm good with it. Like, just give me the shots. Like, that sounds great. I'd be into it.
Yeah.
You're still going to want to do you're still going to need to build the habits of good sleep, good lifestyle factors, that are going to keep you healthy long term. It's not like just taking this testosterone with the rest of your routine still in shambles is going to be like the golden ticket to you feeling a million times better or maintaining long health.
Mhm.
There's a lot of bodybuilders that take a lot of testosterone that are dying in their 60s now, and these are the guys that we saw, in the modern encyclopedia of bodybuilding magazines. A lot of those guys are dead,
Yeah.
and so there's a lot of variables. Testosterone needs to be coupled with all the lifestyle factors.
Yeah, and so let's talk about that for a quick moment. Like, what's the difference between the levels that guys are taking to bodybuild and the levels that someone would be taking to supplement? Because I think people get really freaked out about taking hormones,
Mhm.
or something that will affect your hormones. And let's just go over some of that.
So let's say like a men as a ballpark figure, and this is what I know from the actual like young healthy men produce around 5 to 6 milligrams, the equivalent of 5 to 6 milligrams of testosterone a day.
Mhm.
And so times 7 is like 35. And so let's just say from anywhere from 20 to 50 milligrams of testosterone is produced naturally in the body. Guys on TRT are often taking around those doses, but some guys push it to like 100.
Right.
Some guys push it to 200 per week. And this is where we're probably starting to get closer to what a bodybuilder may take. I think a standard bodybuilder on a like testosterone cycle, maybe taking 300, 400, 500, and some guys up to 1,000 milligrams. But that's like a pretty extreme dosage that a lot of modern guys are pushing the drugs a lot more. But I'd say a bodybuilder on a testosterone cycle might be doing around 400 milligrams of testosterone per week. Which is about 10 times what you would normally produce if you're a healthy person.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's pretty significant. So your system is going to be severely out of balance after doing that for an amount of time, and the effects are going to look a lot different down the road compared to this sort of like maintenance dose
Correct.
supplementation.
Correct. Maintenance dose of a good form of testosterone at a reasonable dosage is absolutely compatible with health over the long haul. Like people can live healthy on TRT probably until the day they die.
Yeah.
Now, there are predisposing factors. Everyone has different risks for heart disease based on some genetic markers, family history. There is a link between testosterone and some different heart conditions. It can exacerbate pre-existing heart conditions. It does make your blood more thick. It increases red blood cell production, making it more likely that you may have clots, especially if you have a lifestyle that's stressed and high inflammatory diet. It can make it more likely you lay down some arterial plaques and stuff like that. There's a lot of pros, and there are certainly some effects, especially if you're taking something in a super physiologic dose.
In terms of supplements and herbs, you mentioned ashwagandha. So I'm thinking about, okay, what am I using in the next 20 years here to sort of keep things balanced? Like, I'm going to get my test. I get my test. I consult with someone. I'm like, I'm feeling this way. Yeah, maybe my testosterone levels are slowly going down, and yeah, maybe I am starting to lose some of my virile energy. I'm still maintaining the same exercise, hot, cold, breath work. What supplements do I want to take to bring those levels up a little bit naturally? You talked about ashwagandha for lowering cortisol, which will bring testosterone up. ZMA, zinc, magnesium, creatine,
D3, vitamin.
D3, which by the way, I didn't know. And I was like, what? Really?
Yeah.
Like
So
this is
deficient men, people deficient in D3, which is a large portion of the population. A lot of sunscreens in some certain parts of the world just don't have enough vitamin D3 because of the latitude of where you're at, and the sun doesn't work part of the year, right?
yeah, yeah.
So D3, people who are deficient in D3 have low testosterone. When it's corrected above 50 nanograms per deciliter, testosterone levels increase. And stress burns through D3 as well. And not enough time outside. So you can see how all these things are starting to get tuned in. So I think D3 is essential. It's great for immune system, has anti-cancer benefits. Need to get those D3. Every time you get your testosterone levels checked, I would get your D3, your serum D3 level checked as well.
Okay. Yeah, I will do that. Yeah, Anthony, I can't tell you how consistent this is, but I run men's groups. I have multiple men's groups, and one of them is in person in Vancouver, and half those guys are depressed in February every year.
Totally.
We're all like,
Totally.
"Oh man, I'm really struggling right now. I don't know what it is," right? And then one of the guys is like, "Well, try this." And we're all like, "Really? Would it be that?" But it makes so much sense. Like, maybe I have seasonal affective disorder,
Mhm.
right? Like, you have the sun is over there disorder.
Yeah, no,
Like, you need to
totally.
get that vitamin.
I want to hammer this home. It's
Yeah.
like when we get morning sunlight on our skin, and actually in our eyes, which entrains this whole circadian rhythm we have, it leads to the production of serotonin in the brain, which again gets converted to melatonin at night and helps us sleep. All this happens from good morning sunshine. If you can
Yep.
get it on your testicles, even better bonus. But like, look, what do we give depressed people? Pharmacologically speaking, like a lot of these
Serotonin.
selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Basically, how to
Yep.
boost serotonin. The sunshine gives us serotonin. And
Yep.
so it's natural if you live in a place, then supplementing with D3 is a good idea as well
Okay.
because it's involved in that whole pathway.
Other herbs. What about pine pollen?
You know, I haven't been huge on it. I think there might be some modest benefits to royal jelly pine pollen. I know there's some huge proponents of it. It has never made my essentials list,
Hmm.
just because I don't know how much like hard research there is on it. But I know a lot of people take it and get very good benefit from it. So for me, it's like more in the so-so camp. I certainly don't think it would hurt.
Yep. Anything else that's worth mentioning supplement wise? Herbs, maca,
Maca,
shilajit.
we formulated a testosterone supplement at Fit Father Project, and here's what we included in ours: vitamin D3, zinc, magnesium, shilajit, which we'll pause there for a second.
Yeah.
Shilajit is a resin of minerals found in the high mountains, in the Himalaya mountains is where a lot of these things are found. And it has some really unique compounds, a bunch of minerals, but also something called fulvic acid that has a benefit on testosterone production. And a lot of the bring back the yogis, but a lot of the yogis would eat this resin, and they believed it helped them with longevity and feeling very viral and good. So I think that shilajit from a good source is fantastic. We include that in our supplement. We include Tribulus
Ah,
terrestris, which
mhm.
is an herb. Now, I don't. The research is mixed on whether or not it exactly boosts testosterone. But it does absolutely have an effect on subjective well-being, libido, and a lot of these other benefits that we have. Because it's not just testosterone that leads to this feeling of libido and energy. It's a lot of these derivatives of testosterone. FSH is another hormone that has to play with that. DHT is another hormone that has to do with this. These are like concert hormones with testosterone that are beneficial. So we keep the tribulus in there, and we also have a long jack is another herb that we have in there,
Oh,
which is good for sperm quality and libido as well.
long jack.
Yep,
Cool.
long jack, cool name, right?
Yeah.
Someone named it right.
Yeah.
And we also include boron in ours. 5 to 10 milligrams of boron. It's a trace mineral that not enough of us get in our diets. It comes from mostly eating fruits and vegetables and stuff like that. We include boron. There's some pretty good research that taking around 5 to 10 milligrams of boron does increase testosterone levels. And this is way more boron than you'd ever be able to get through a diet.
Right. Where do people get that supplement?
On our Fit Father Project store, so you can Google Fit Father store or store.fitfather project. It's called Test Booster RX. It's super solid. I really like it just because we included like the 7 or 8 things in there that are like actually research proven, bang for
Yeah.
your buck. There are a bunch of other herbs that have some benefits on, libido and other things like that, but aren't actually like true proven boosters. I think, and I want to toss in a whole different class of compounds that I think are beneficial because there's ways to boost testosterone through let's give the minerals and the vitamins that are needed for the production. And then
Yeah.
let's give the stuff as well that helps lower the cortisol and the stress that allows our bodies to do this naturally.
Yeah.
So there's a whole compound of herbs and mushrooms fall in these two called adaptogens.
Mhm.
Adaptogenic compounds are basically a herbal class of compounds that help us deal with stress. So some common ones, ashwagandha is a very powerful adaptogen. Something you might also find in some formulas is something called rhodiola, all the ginsengs. There's a lot of adaptogenic mushrooms like cordyceps, reishi.
Chaga.
Chaga would be another good example, right? Maitake, shiitake.
Yep.
These are good things to have in there just because generally they help boost your immune system and help you deal with stress. The best one, though, is ashwagandha for
Yeah.
men. It's my favorite adaptogen for basically helping the body become more resilient to stress. And for exercise and performance, I think that rhodiola or a Panax ginseng are good. Not testosterone boosters, but good for energy, virality, and stuff like that.
Rhodiola, ginseng. What about cordyceps?
I love it. I think cordyceps is good. For me, I find it can cause a slight increase in blood pressure because it is very energizing. But
Yep.
overall, I think it's a really good mushroom.
In Canada, best source for this stuff, in my opinion, is Harmonic Arts for people who want to get mushroom powder and things like rhodiola and ashwagandha. Harmonic Arts is a fantastic herbal dispensary.
Nice.
In the U.S., what are your favorite sources for mushrooms? Is Stamets your favorite,
Yeah,
or
I love Paul
right.
Stamets. I think he's
Yeah,
probably like the best on the research front. And then commercially available ones that a lot of health stores would be like Four Sigmatic is a company that has a lot of great mushroom products. I take Paul Stamets immune mushroom blend every single day, especially because everything going on in time filming this, right? A lot of people are concerned about viruses and stuff like that. Mushrooms
yep,
are phenomenal for increasing your immune system. Will also help, anti-cancer properties when you have a strong immune system. Because remember, as we get older, our immune system gets older too. And
yep,
these mushrooms and adaptogenic compounds help our immune system stay active, along with like the Wim Hof breathing. Like if you fast, if you do breath work every day, you get sunshine, you eat clean foods, you're going to live a long, healthy life. Like barring you don't use the crosswalk well, like you're going to
right,
make it pretty long and far.
exactly. Yeah. Do you drink coffee?
I personally do not. I did for years. In coffee, and here's my stance on it. I think coffee is actually positively associated with longevity, and I think in a proper dosage is fine. Has benefits to fat burning. There are some cognitive benefits to coffee and all the different phenolic compounds in coffee. That being said, I find for me that my energy is more stable when I'm not reliant on an external stimulant. And I think this is probably the case for most people. I believe coffee can be fine, but if it ends up being a crutch where you absolutely need these things
Yeah.
to have a body that feels energized, I think it's a very slippery slope. Um, so I do get some caffeine from green tea, which is a great longevity boosting drink that I think a lot of people should have. I drink a lot of green tea. I drink a lot of holy basil tea, which is also known as Tulsi.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. And and I guess coffee on occasion. Like I may have it once a month or so. I know it's very low for most people. But if you are taking your coffee and you like it, it's fine. But I would also watch your intake. If you know you're dependent on it, might not be the best thing long term.
Yeah, that's been my main thing, is watching my intake and making sure I'm not drinking as much as some of my friends were
Exactly.
pumping back in Alberta. It's like when I lived in Alberta, it's like coffee, coffee, coffee all the time,
Yeah.
and Tim Hortons and McDonald's.
Totally.
Now my thing is, I have a pot of chaga on the stove all the time, and it's brewing.
Nice.
I brew it. I wake up and I get it heated up, and it's boiling for 3-4 hours until it's time for me to eat breakfast. I don't drink coffee before breakfast. I make my coffee with sort of, I'm really picky about beans. I make sure I get medium or light roast, and that
Nice.
it's organic. And I make the coffee with the chaga and the French press.
That's good.
And then I do it bulletproof style. So I blend it with coconut milk and
It's
coconut oil,
helpful. Those
MCT.
fats tend to take the edge off it a little bit, you know?
Totally.
They're helpful for
It's
sure.
very smooth. And then what I also do is I cleanse from that a couple times a year.
Good.
And I go on a plant diet or something. I go do ayahuasca or something, and
Mhm.
so you can't drink coffee. And so I clean it out of the system and just make sure that I'm not like tethered to it, which it's, I wouldn't call it an addiction, but I would call it a dependency. And
Yeah.
you don't want to get to a place where your body is dependent on something like that to feel okay.
Right.
Is that
Exactly.
you're
That's
constantly in
that,
withdrawal.
that's my exact stance on it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
great. Okay, any other things that you'd like to share about longevity, and anything that's come up in this conversation about what men need to know about, like, what a guy like me needs to know at 36, sort of mapping out the last 2/3 of my life here, and wanting to live high quality and virile, young, strong, and then just drop dead at some point would be
Yeah.
my ideal.
Yeah. I mean,
Right?
yeah, I totally agree. I think, um, some of these X factors we haven't talked about that don't exactly have a biological basis are probably just as important for longevity. And I'm talking about finding meaningful work in your life and
Mm.
service keeps people alive for a very long time. We've all probably heard the stories of the people who work for, kind of like your granddad, work until they're 85 and they stop
Yep.
working, then they drop dead. It's because purpose drives the spirit. And it's often purpose that's kind of has a service component to it. And this is kind of back to that Blue Zones research is almost all the centenarians had meaningful social connections and meaningful work.
Yep.
They had stuff that really lit them up. And that's perhaps one of the best stress relievers there is. I think when people feel directionless and they don't have a community is when they feel probably the most stressed, because we're not meant to be isolated. What's the confinement for prisoners? You put them in, social isolation without any real purpose. Like, man,
Yep.
that's how you break somebody, right? So on the flip side of that, how do you support somebody? meaningful work and great social connections. So that's for each of us to find on our path. But I believe that to probably be as important as a lot of these other factors. We hear a lot of these headline stories on Yahoo News or whatever. It's like grandma lives to 110, smoking a pack a day,
Yeah.
and like you see her with her grandkids. There are some people who will live a long life, just based on, genes alone promotes that kind of stuff. But a lot of these people tend to have, some things that are supporting them and things to live for.
A
So I believe
reason,
that's as important.
a reason to live. Yeah. And at some point, uh, one has to draw the distinction between meaningful work and work that makes you lots of money, because
Yeah,
we often derive meaning from money, but at some point you realize that you've twisted things up a little bit, and
totally.
that eventually, like once you get above a certain amount, money really doesn't matter, and that you don't really feel the benefits. You're just sort of chasing a dragon. You're chasing something that you're never going to catch, and that one really needs to examine, like, do I really feel passionate about the work that I'm doing, or am I just passionate about making money? And if you're passionate about making money, which many of us are, how can you make money while you're also standing in a purposeful way of making money, right?
Mhm.
It's something where you feel like you're actually contributing to a community, like, oh, these people need me, or like, oh, I feel fulfilled by doling out the help that I'm creating, the value that I'm creating for the world. So
And
yeah.
you're spot on. And I want to add on one more thought too. It relates a lot to like a meditation practice, which I believe is also going to be important in the tail end of this discussion. It's a lot of these things that bring us true happiness are self-transcendent practices, things that move us beyond a small concept of self and into like the larger picture of everything that's happening maybe in the cosmos, everything that's happening in your community. But it's like bigger than us. It's bigger than this small condensed aspect of money, or even like an identity that you hold about yourself, I hold about myself. It's this expansive kind of service thing. Whether or not anyone listening to this is a religious person, I believe this is a through line of good values in a lot of culture, is that we're here to co-create and to add as much good to other people in the process of living a free and healthy life. So that's essential. And one other thing, it's like keeping the body healthy, obviously important, and that goes along with keeping the brain healthy. That being said, cognitive decline is a huge thing that's happening to so many people. It's we're seeing it happen to our parents. Our parents saw it happen to their parents,
Mhm.
and the big factor is, again, a healthy diet that controls those blood sugars, huge, but also keeping the brain very active. And we do know that those who meditate or have some kind of presence or concentration practice daily, which is different than the busyness of the distracted work when we're binging all over the place. But a very like focused work does help neuron genesis, and new nerves, new neurons are growing, and the memory stays a lot sharper. So I think that's also something that needs to be on the table here for living a long and healthy life, because we live in a world that's more distracted than ever. We're being pulled. The neurotransmitters are binging all over the place. Dopamine with this headline, this news, that story. And so insofar as we can also do some meditation, I think that's essential.
Very important. Yeah, I was doing a call with my friend Harry yesterday, and he was saying he's been meditating for 20 minutes a day. He was doing the Waking Up app, and he feels like it's changing his brain.
Mhm.
He's almost 50 years old, and he said, I hated meditation for my whole life. I've always, like, he's a healthy guy. He's done the carnivore diet and he's been a personal trainer, but he's always hated meditation because of the sort of like having to sit still, right? He's one of these guys. And he's like, you just find the right teacher, the right opportunity to lock into something and stick with it, and he's like, I feel like it's changing my brain, like I'm able to deal with more on a daily basis. And my latest thing that I'm big on is actually the Muse headband, which you put on. It gives you biofeedback, and tells you when you're like,
Yeah.
when you're off in the clouds thinking about something.
Yeah.
It's brings in a storm. You can hear the storm, and then you're like, oh yeah, okay.
That's cool.
Focus on my breath. And then all of a sudden the birds come out, tweet, tweet, tweet. And you feel, and then you're like, the birds are out. And you get distracted by the birds, and it takes you back out into
The
thought. But
clouds.
yeah, it's a very cool process to like really hone in that process. So yeah, very beneficial. Thank you for mentioning that piece. Anything else?
No, we got to go. I think you
Fantastic,
said
man. Okay, well, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciated this discussion. I've never really talked about health, well, I've talked about health, but men's aging and longevity and hormones on the show. And like, you were definitely the guy to have on. So I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on and
Thanks,
talking.
man. This was a blast.